Welcome to the second episode of Industries in Transition, Meet the CSO. This series helps us understand how the role of the Chief Sustainability Officer is changing across a range of industries as they prioritise the transition to net zero. Today, I'm pleased to chat with our own CSO, Marisa, who joined Standard Chartered earlier this month. Marisa joins us as we increasingly embed ESG priorities into our work with clients and our communities, and as we look to mobilise billions of dollars in international capital to where it's needed most. So I know you've been an investment banker for a long time. What made you shift that portfolio to focus much more on the sustainability side?
I had a very fateful moment in my former organization where my group CEO called me out of a meeting one day, asked me to fly and meet him in Zurich to talk about something that was on his mind. What he was sensing and seeing was that there was this quest on the part of our clients, no matter what type of client segment we were talking about, whether it was our corporates or the investor community or indeed our wealth clients, they were all grappling with this notion of purpose and profit, this idea that you could participate through your business activities in a more sustainable future. There was sometimes agitation from next gen. All these things were bubbling. And he said, there's a real role for us to play as an institution. And in fact, it is such a big thing that I think this is the future of our organization and finance. And we need to rethink and reshape the way we think about finance. And there's a business here, and you should run it. Obviously, the more that I dug in and actually understood the profound implications of what was hitting us in all of this, I felt like I needed to be a part of it.
You spend a lot of time in capital markets. How do you think that sort of capital markets role dovetails into the whole CSO space? And I guess more particularly, how do we see capital markets helping us solve the whole journey to net zero?
At its heart, at its very essence, it's about mobilizing capital at scale, and that's exactly what the markets do. So therefore, I think my background in capital markets allowed me to sort of see the role that the investment community could play. If I look back at maybe where the genesis of a lot of the CSO roles were originally formed, it came up often through the risk organization, which makes perfect sense because where does climate risk hit you? It's in your exposures and sometimes in your physical assets, so that makes sense. But if we look at the other side of the coin, which is how do you seize the opportunity and also how do you support your clients, that's really got to come from either raising capital or providing advice. And that's where my background is from. And so that all made a whole lot of sense to me when I was contemplating taking on this role and participating in the field. And then to the second part of your question, how do the markets actually do this? Well, they're incredibly efficient. So if we can set the right enabling conditions, whether that be a little bit of incentive activity, whether that be trying to show how important this is for the own sustainable future of our clients, then they will, I think, engage with us in a very proactive way, and then we can use the markets to do this in a very constructive and scaled way.
We talk about just transition. It's not just turning the tap off. It's about getting clients to participate in just transition.
Absolutely.
And why Standard Chartered?
Once you go down the rabbit hole of sustainability, you then, I think, become very, very mission focused. And if we think about just climate change, forgetting all the social issues of these world's most pressing challenges, there is a sense of urgency. And where does the world need the capital the most? It's in the developing markets, and that is exactly the footprint of Standard Chartered. So on the one hand, it is the ability to do this in the places that absolutely need the capital, but also when I took a look at Standard Chartered, and you and I have had a conversation for a little while now, I saw an enormous amount of intent from executive management and the board all the way down. This is very, very serious proposition for the bank. And then there was a lot of innovation going on. And so all of that was the perfect alchemy that said, maybe this is the place for me for the next phase of my career.
And when you look at the financial services sector in general, how do you think the role of the CSO, how is the role developing?
Initially, if you'd looked back a handful of years, you'd have seen if an organization had a CSO, they probably did come up through the risk function, particularly in banks, or possibly the marketing function. And my belief is if you are really going to be participating in this capital mobilization, if you've got some kind of history in the markets, if you've served clients by helping them raise capital in the more traditional format, you're very well placed to understand the language of the investment community, how to structure deals, all those things. So I think increasingly what you're going to see is more and more CSOs actually coming from the front office. So that's on the one hand. The second thing is, if you believe the consultants, what they will tell you is the fastest route to be CEO back in the old days might have been a corporate development role or maybe CFO. And now they're saying the CSO is one of the most strategic roles that you can have. Why is that? Because this is so very necessary, right, on behalf of your clients and your other stakeholders. So therefore, it is a C-suite agenda, and I think that you're going to see more and more. If companies don't have CSOs, they appoint them, and witness me being the inaugural CSO of Standard Chartered, who's very serious, of course, about the space. But also, what is the definition of what a CSO is supposed to do? It is helping to embed sustainability across the organization, but also drive that strategic agenda and the revenue proposition.
There's a lot to do, but if you could sort of highlight, I know, 2 or 3 of the top issues and challenges that the sector's facing, what would they be?
Some of the bigger ones are that in a fast-moving space, and by the way, this is a perfect analog to any developing market. You know, when the market is taking off at pace, it's usually led by the business, and oftentimes, what I'd say, the framework runs to catch up. And that framework could be in the form of regulatory intervention, which we're seeing right now. Regulators are scrambling to try to put regulation around the sustainability field, both to ensure that there's good hygiene that's happening, but also that we're focusing on the right things and on the risk side. But also the challenge, of course, is that you don't have adoption of standards. And what do we need for markets to scale? I always say it is some agreement as to best practice. And I think that is something that, of course, we're working on, but we don't have all that together yet in the sustainability arena. And the final thing I would point to is the lack of consistent and cohesive data. Because if people are going to make informed investment decisions about participating and investing in sustainability, they do need good information. And today, it's really hard to compare apples to apples across the disclosures that exist. But again, all of this is a work in process and very much, I think, endemic to a maturing market. So I'm very hopeful we'll get there.
So you and I spend a lot of time talking to clients. And I think it's fair to say that some clients are quite advanced in their plans towards transition, and some are starting to think about what that really means for them. What do you see as, I guess, the CSO role and then the bank's role in supporting that journey for clients towards transition?
In the traditional bell curve of everything, you typically will have an early adopter group, and that tends to be the front part of the tail. Then you'll have a big bubble in the middle who are kind of curious and wanting to participate in the journey but need help along the way. And then you might have the cynics, which is the lower part of the tail. I'd say most of our clients fall in that middle bucket. They want to participate, they know it's important, they're hearing it from their stakeholders, but they just don't know how to get it done. They don't know how to operationalize this. They don't know how to frame the investment case. And oftentimes there are competing pressures. If you are a corporate that's a public company, you are subject to these short-term quarterly pressures, and yet oftentimes there's a long-term investment in the transition of your business model. So I think what they look for from their advisors and their bankers are, number one, of course, how to raise the capital, but also, two, how to think about the best practice in their industry, how to think about what information is relevant and material, and then how do they think about the transformation of that business model and bring the stakeholders along, whether that's your board, whether that's your investors. All of that is an important part of the journey, and bankers have a huge role to play in that.
Here at Standard Chartered, we recently joined with DBS, with Temasek, with the Singapore Stock Exchange to launch Carbon Impact Exchange. How do you think the carbon markets can play a role in that journey towards net zero?
This is a perfect example of what's necessary in the sustainability field. You need collaboration across different types of stakeholders. So when you look at who the players are, you've got a bank, you have an exchange, and you have a very, very prominent investor in the form of Temasek. And this collaboration, I think, is important because each of these parties brings something to the table that the other doesn't have, and that combination is pretty powerful. So how is this going to help? First of all, probably the worst to suffer from climate change are the developing markets. And we do not, at this point, have enough capital going to the places where they need it most. And some of this is a function of the fact that we don't have clear and transparent markets. And if we could put a proper price that is transparent on carbon, that has a big role to play because we are not pricing in the exogenous factors of the negative damage that we do. But equally, in the very big quest for those who are very much on this net zero journey, For the hard to abate piece that you can't today, there's not technology that will get you to net zero, what do you need to do? You need to buy carbon offsets or carbon projects. And in the data problem arena, we don't have enough clarity today on what are really truly working, high-functioning, quality carbon credits. You have many, many projects that are proliferating with well-intentioned people, but oftentimes you don't actually know if the money that you're spending on a reforestation project, for instance, is actually working. Are the trees absorbing the carbon that you think they are? Are they planted in the right soil in the right locations? All of this sort of thing is really critical, because if the market's going to have confidence to deploy the capital in this arena, they want to know that it's actually working, that the impact is having the intended effect. And I think by creating a market where you have transparency, that you use high quality data, that you can give confidence to those investors, the money will follow. And that is exactly what I think this exchange is trying to do.
Thank you very much. You've got a lot to do. We've got a lot to do. I certainly look forward to working with you on that, as does the rest of Standard Chartered.